Hello, everyone, and welcome to StuffTV. I'm your host, Nick Huzar. I'm also the co-founder of OfferUp, and over many, many years of observing billions of dollars of secondhand goods exchange hands in the marketplace I helped build, I started thinking a lot about my own existence and how I impact the planet. And I scoured the internet trying to find answers, and I found it really, really hard. And I think we all wonder this to various degrees. And so what I started to do was interview really interesting thought leaders in a podcast like this. And today I'm really excited to have Shoaib Iqbal with us from Esper satellites. And so if you want to think about, what is happening on our planet, how can we monitor these things? Shoaib has a really interesting company, and I'll hand it over to him to tell us a little bit more about his company, his vision, and why he started this. So thank you for being here, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks a lot, Nick. Hey, everyone. I'm the CEO of Esper Satellites. We're a company that's building and launching sensors into orbit. We're using these sensors to track a number of climate metrics. So everything from atmospheric greenhouse gases to surface level metrics for agriculture and mining. I started the company while I was still at university studying my degree in space science. So my background comes from a lot of university side projects, building and launching stuff on suborbital rockets. And then using a lot of that experience to build something in climate. And that's how Esper came about. I wanted to just build something in space, and I also still wanted to have a positive impact through my skill sets on climate. And that's what's a really driving factor for me and Esper.
Yeah, one of the things I think really interesting when you think about space, and especially now with everything happening in climate, it's, if you think about the history of how long we've been monitoring this world we're on, it's not very long. If you think about when we launched, I think Sputnik was launched in 1957. That was like the first, I think, satellite out there. And then we've kind of been launching satellites ever since. And now we have data, which we didn't have when I was a kid. We had some, but now we've got decades of data. So we can start to analyze, some of the impacts of that we have had as humans on our planet. And I think, there's 7,000 satellites now orbiting out in space. And I think SpaceX has over 3,000 alone. And if you think of how young that company is, it's fascinating to see that they have over, almost half the satellites that are out there already. So maybe I'd be curious on your own kind of perspective around space. How do you think about some of those things? And, what are you hoping to launch? Because you're getting ready to launch your first satellite, right? You haven't launched one quite yet.
Yeah, that's right. So I think, space is of course, space is cool. That's something that really attracts a lot of people, with everything from, the first moon landing all the way to the space shuttle program. It's really interesting how a lot of that came about during the Cold War, right after World War II, where basically that rivalry between the US and Russia is something that really propelled a lot of that technology forward. I was just a couple of days ago, I was reading how the US was basically, once Sputnik was launched, it really started that entire space race because the Russians had actually managed to something. And after that, then of course, there was this entire campaign of launching spy satellites. Now, these were really cool satellites in the sense that these were satellites with still film cameras on them. So you would, the satellite would have this entire roll of film. It would be capturing all of this information while it's actually up there, looking at sites over Russia. And once the satellite re-enters its orbit and burns up, you would actually have to go out and find that roll of film wherever it's landed on the Earth and actually retrieve a lot of that information. So that was basically where everything started in the space or that satellite industry, because that, the initial rivalries really was propelled everything from propulsion technologies to, all the other sustaining technologies around that once we got into
hypersonic programs. Remember the SR-71, which we don't have anymore? I mean, that all came about in that era. And that was exactly the thought behind it was, we can move. I forgot how fast that plane moves, but it's kind of ridiculously quick.
Exactly. I think it's still one of the fastest acknowledged moving spacecraft, aircrafts. Well, I say acknowledged because that's what we know publicly, and there's I think Lockheed's like working on putting more cool stuff out.
Yeah, I heard that maybe we're finally going to bring back the Concorde, but I'll believe it when I see it. So maybe digging a little, deeper into like your ambitions, because your goal out there is not to create a space satellite. So what is it around climate that you find interesting, and what are you hoping to monitor with some of your first satellites that you put out there?
That's right. So we see satellites as just data points and tools to collect data, or like an entire infrastructure that is made for collection of data. With our satellites, we're specifically looking at the three industries. So we look at direct climate data, so everything from greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, all the way to looking at where the carbon sources are actually going, especially for carbon sequestration, looking at entire masses of forests, entire masses of seaweed on coasts, because seaweed is actually a really good sink of carbon dioxide. Another second thing that we look at is more on the mining side. So mining is a little bit controversial because a lot of people know, rightfully so, that mining has a huge environmental impact. Basically digging up material, you're really disrupting the ecosystem around that while also causing a huge carbon footprint. We see mining to still be a very important industry as we go, as we have more new technologies come about, especially with critical minerals. So these are minerals like lithium, cobalt, gold, stuff that goes into our batteries, stuff that goes into our electronics, and that's necessary for us to transition into other types of green tech, whether it be solar panels or having electric cars on the road. And we want to be playing in that area where we're looking to provide the best data we can to make that entire industry as sustainable as possible by increasing the overall efficiencies, while also exploring for these newer minerals.
Yeah, less impact. So I did a recent podcast with a company called EnergyX, and they do a lot of lithium mining. And I was also advising a company on that's out there to do more AI level mining, where their pitch is, hey, we can do it faster, cheaper, and less disruptive to the planet, which is really interesting, because you think about how much time and permitting, all the work, well, at least in the US, to go and find and source these things and dig up the earth, like, it's so disruptive. And so if you can use technology, either it's a satellite or some other system, and to be more efficient, that could be massive, and even potentially faster. So I don't know. Maybe, I don't know how much people are leveraging satellites to do kind of what you're talking about. Do you think this is a fairly new space, or is this kind of more proven, where people have already been narrowing down kind of areas for mining, leveraging satellites?
Yeah, what we've seen is that people have known about satellite data, and it's been, hyped up quite a bit, but it hasn't really been like commercialized in the sense where, let's say, every mining company in the world is using satellite data, or every, agricultural company, or every person who's looking to track climate data is using satellite data. It's still niche in the sense where it's, I guess, again, people know about it, but no one's really using it, just because the data has not been there, or like the quality of that data, or can be derived from that information has not been there. That's where we come in. So as I mentioned, we're building these sensors. These are essentially imagers or hyperspectral imagers that capture light in these hundreds of wavelengths to basically do spectroscopy. What that means is we're taking pictures of the planet, but our pictures can basically help us decode every point on the planet on a chemical level. So everything in the atmosphere all the way to surface level on the Earth, we're able to decode all of that on a chemical level. That's allowing us to give this additional dimension on the data for mining and ag and all of these other different industries.
It sounds, when you say proscroscopy, it sounds like a colonoscopy for the planet. Going deep into the bowels of the planet.
In some ways, definitely. Like it is, seeing the unseen, or seeing what people may not want to be seen.
Yeah. I think that's, again, it's so fascinating, because I don't think as a kid we even had nearly this type of technology where we could actually answer these questions. And sometimes in isolation, you might get one data point, but the fact with tech and where it is today and everything you can leverage, you can put all these data points together to just have a better point of view. The other one we should spend a little time talking about is just at the macro level. I think the cost and how more efficient it is and how you're able to do this today. And I applaud people like SpaceX and Elon Musk for what they did, because historically to launch a space shuttle in the atmosphere was like $1 million of gas. It's such a waste, and you couldn't really put a big payload out there. And I think the genius of Elon Musk was, hey, why are we doing this? Why can't we lighten everything up? Why can't we reuse these rockets? Why can't we make it more efficient? And like we were sharing earlier, as a result, they have almost half the satellites in space in the last decade. And, I think because of that, my assumption is the cost has gone down so rapidly that people like yourself are saying, oh, I can launch these things and explore. Do you think at a macro level, that's a true statement? Like that's because of SpaceX and others that the cost has gone down in a way that it's creating more innovation in this space?
Absolutely. Because as you mentioned, like launching a satellite would be an endeavor that would cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And if you're just putting that investment in, you can't really risk losing it. Which is why, you would always go for legacy equipment. You would go for legacy technology that's, been proven to work in space. And there would be very little innovation from one step to the other, unless, if you have like $1 billion in your pocket. Now, when it comes to that commercial side, because of SpaceX and a lot of these other commercial players, the costs going down to launch these things, the risk has gone down as well. The barriers to entry are so less. That's why a company like ours can come out with basically, experimental technology that may not have been fully proven out in orbit to actually launch these things at a fairly large scale. That just allows us to, like me, someone who's fresh out of university, to actually go out and build a company that can actually do a lot of these hard things. Another layer on top of that is it's also creating a mindset of innovation around just being really lean in the space industry, which I guess this industry is not very used to. And that's something that we've taken upon ourselves as well, where we're now manufacturing these sensors for 20 times less than what they usually cost in industry. And that, that era, this new era that's coming up of just like low cost manufacture of space hardware is basically changing the entire game, especially as Starship launches and all these other rocket players come into play.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I remember a few things as you were talking. I remember I was in Hawaii a number of years ago, and I saw one of the SpaceX arrays fly over, and it was low altitude. So at first I saw satellite, whoop-de-doo, but it seemed really bright. I'm like, oh, it's probably low. And then all of a sudden in the sky, 29, it was 30 of them I counted. And we were at this luau, and everyone stopped. Everyone's like, what the heck? And it was such a crazy thing to see. And my understanding is they'll launch them all. They all, will fly out of the rocket, and then they slowly start to spread out, and they slowly start to gain altitude. And so we're fortunate that we happen to see probably an early, I don't know what you call, I'll call it a hatch. There's probably a specific term. So that was really, I thought that was just a kind of a treat to see something like that, because it just highlights where we are now in terms of space exploration. And the other one, I was fortunate, back to the cost, I was able to go down and visit this company called Relativity Space. And the CEO and founder of this company was like in his mid-20s when I met him. And his vision at the time was to build a fully 3D printed rocket. And he was only working on a gas tank at the time. That's all it was. And he had these massive, I think it was one of the biggest 3D printing arms I think on the planet to build this gas tank. And now I think he just did his first full rocket launch a few months ago, which is fascinating. But he used to be at Blue Origin, and Jeff Bezos just didn't want to spend any time on it. So he went out and raised a whole bunch of money, and he's getting after it like that. So it's just another example of so much inertia in this space. And a bunch of things aren't going to work like anytime you're innovating, but it's okay. I think overall, a bunch of these things will, and we will all benefit, from that. And so clearly, I think the fact that you're able to leverage this for these sensors and things you're building, like you said, fresh out of school, it's like, I'm going to go launch a rocket, Mom. I mean, what did you tell your parents when you do you think you were crazy?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think every time I talked about like building a company, even it would always be like, because I come from like an Indian background, and it's really drilled into us to be like, hey, go to school, get a degree, you go work at 9 to 5, and then slowly build a belt over time. Really, for at least, especially coming from my culture, I'm going on a very non-traditional route, so it's definitely scared them a lot. Now they're in it as well, so they're as excited as me to see these birds fly. So first launch is going up in October, then another one going up in January. So we're really close.
That's really cool. My dad had one job. He worked at Boeing his whole life for 40 plus years, and so now at this point, I don't know. I'm not that old, but I've probably worked at 8 different companies now. And so my dad's like, any great dad, he's like, whatever you want to do, son, just have fun and, enjoy it. But I'm sure a lot of times he just thinks it's the craziest thing, because he would never in his wildest dreams decide to venture out in something crazy like that. So it's not for everybody. Absolutely. I always say that, but it's so with this launch that you're doing, maybe can you talk us through kind of what is some of the planning associated with it? And then maybe just to whatever degree you're able to share, like what is the payload that's in there? What, maybe walk us through the process of what it took to actually build this.
Yeah. So within these 2 first launches, they're basically our demonstrators. So we're not really expecting to make a whole lot of money out of it. These are, in the purest word of the term, they're our minimum viable product. The sensors that we're putting on there are, I think, the version 3 of our current sensor stack. We call them Espressos. So just a play on the word. So these 2 sensors are very much just testing out 2 main things. So they're testing out the actual spectroscopy technology that we've been able to build, the actual mechanical hardware. Then the second thing is the actual onboard software that we're building. And that software is, again, sort of going back to that point of how things have just gotten really easier to launch, or how it has gotten easier to launch these things up into orbit. We're able to play around with a lot of experimental stuff. And for us, it's really that software or that onboard firmware that we're running that really takes a lot of this low-cost hardware that we've been able to manufacture and really derives really good data from it. So it's basically proving that core technology out on these 2 launches. So they're one's flying on an Indian rocket in October, then the second one's going on the SpaceX Falcon 9. Those 2 are our first demonstrator launches. And once we get these things up in orbit, we're just, it'll just really put us in a different league.
Yeah, you'll start to learn a ton. And remind me, I think when we were initially connecting, you were saying that this company that you're launching with in India, this is also their first flight, right? Is that correct? It's their first launch or no?
The hardware itself, it's launched before, but the company themselves, it's their first time as well. So, we're very trusting with them, just because the hardware is.
I was going to say it's like two startups jumping off a cliff together. Okay, I hope this works.
Exactly. Hey, at least together we can. At least together we can build one half of the wingspan. So hopefully we can fly something.
There you go. When you think about, where you are today, I'd be curious, like maybe how big is your team and what is kind of your ambition over the next 5 to 10 years as you think about, kind of monitoring and where you want to go?
Yeah. So we currently are around 7 people. So most of the team is, focused on building the tech with my CTO and all of the engineers that we currently have. We see hyperspectral and climate just being the first chapter of our story. The 5 plus 10 plus year goal that we currently have is that we want to basically measure the entirety of the physical world. Now, the way we sort of get there, it may need us to launch, hundreds of these satellites, or it may be we need to go out and completely develop a different type of sensor that complements the stuff that we're already launching. We don't know exactly what it looks like, but we know that is the North Star that we're trying to get to. And that is what will really help us become a multi-billion-dollar company, A, but B, it would really help us really interweave ourselves into daily life and actually make a positive impact in day-to-day operations of just humans in general. So yeah, that's like our North Star. That's the vision that we're really trying to build towards over the next 5 to 10 years.
Who was the gentleman that was on the space station, the longest guy? And remember, he was the one that was really being very vocal about what he was seeing in the world. What was his name? He was an American.
Kelly. I might be very much wrong.
Yeah, that might have been him. I'm gonna look him up.
Yeah, what are you talking about? Is
Scott Kelly.
I think they call it the overseer effect. Even on, I guess, the people who went, who still go up on, Jeff Bezos's ride, where they like touch the a bit and then come back down. They experience the same things. It's just, taking the entire world and then looking at it, from like a macro perspective, where you just have everyone on this blue pill dot, right? It's really alters the way you sort of think about humanity and just life on this planet.
I'm assuming you've seen those other videos too, where it really makes you feel insignificant, right? It shows Earth, and then it zooms out and it shows the sun, and then it zooms out and it shows the next biggest, and then it zooms way out to like the biggest known star we have, and you just get up out of your seat. You're like, I'm nothing.
Exactly.
You feel really small.
So after that,
yeah, you're like, well, what do I do now? What else do you find interesting? I know we kind of talked about, kind of the history of space, where we are now, what you're doing. Are there other things that you think anyone watching this might be, interested in?
Yeah, I think the main thing that I really like about, I guess, space or space industry in general is like, it's not all about exploration, right? Like, exploration is a huge core part of it, yes. And that's what really, pushes a lot of core technologies forward, but a lot of it is just beyond, trying to get to Mars. It's beyond just building that planetary goal that everyone tries to go after, that's entire sci-fi goal. Especially in the work that we're doing, and I guess, companies like ours are doing, whether it be, directly in Earth observation or in like tangential industries, it's making a whole lot of impact, a whole lot of positive impact for people who are living down here. And I think that's just not emphasized enough. People look at a satellite imagery and they're like, yeah, cool. But they don't really sort of realize like the back end that needs to go into it to sort of get in there. And then, of course, there's a lot of passion that still goes on around people who want to go to Mars and whatnot. So yeah, that's probably where, a lot of, I guess, our works and our emphasis goes into. Is just like, hey, it's much more than just, the exploration side of things. It's a lot to do with our day-to-day lives here on Earth. And, that the same technology that's being used to build and launch people up there is also being built and launched to actually solve problems back at home. Because that's, a really go-to argument is like, why don't we solve Earth's problems first? And we are doing that with the same technologies that are being used to send people further out.
Yeah, I think one of the things, I know the ambitions of Elon Musk. I mean, the reason we're doing all this to support our planet is one thing, is you have to make this economically viable to support such a major undertaking. And so we're doing a lot to support the planet, even like, Starlink and all that. That's just bringing internet to places all over the place that is helping humanity. And so I think that's an awesome thing. At the end of the day, too, we can also point it the other direction. We can also point it out into space, right? We can leverage that as kind of a stepping stone for Mars and other places we want. And so, I think my assumption, and again, I'm not a big, as close to this as everyone else, but, I think once we can start building stuff out in space, maybe the moon, we can start doing a lot of other interesting things, because it just, the amount to get out of our atmosphere, it's like a gigantic kind of suction cup, right? You got to get there. That's just costs a lot to get out there. But if we could start to manufacture things out in space, it becomes a lot cheaper. There was a episode I shot a few weeks ago. Somebody was talking about, I don't know, it was contacts or something. There's a bunch of these weird manufacturing things on Earth. They're like, oh, it's much cheaper if we do this in space.
I was just, absolutely. There's like companies like Warda Space and like Space Forge and all these guys, like we can basically build in space factories. And even, going back to my university days, we did a lot of research that could only be done in like microgravity. So we had to basically fly these experiments like really high altitude, and then basically let the plane fall a little bit so it simulates zero gravity. that is just super important, doing a whole lot of like biological experiments. I think again, going back to Warda, they're doing like a launch in a few months where they're launching pharmaceutical equipment up into orbit. So that's fairly exciting there. Our company doesn't necessarily need stuff up there, but of course, if we build our sensors up in orbit, then that's an entire cost component gone out of the window. It's just we just have a factory just pumping these things out as they sort of get the end of their lifetime. So we're looking forward to seeing that day.
Yeah. What do you think about, on a more personal level of if you ever had the option to either one, go out and land on the moon, let's say that happens in some time in your lifetime, or even venture to Mars, would you be an early adopter on that, or are you going to wait for a while?
Gosh, every time I think about it, it's like, so I do get homesick a lot. So I feel like I do not see myself going up into space just yet. It's definitely something maybe later down the line I might think about, but for now it's like I'm a homebody or an Earth body, if you would.
You need mom's cooking. You can't survive on MREs, some space food, for too long. And if people wanted to learn more about and kind of follow, do they just go to your website? What's the best way to kind of follow what you're doing?
Yeah, our website and our LinkedIn are probably the best ways. We're trying to have a bigger audience on Twitter. But yeah, like LinkedIn is probably where basically update things live as they happen.
Yes, for anyone that's watching, it's just espersatellites.co. So that's ESPER satellites with an S.co. And there's probably more information you'll post there. Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing kind of some of these really interesting insights. I think it's really fascinating. And I applaud you for taking on such a big undertaking, like right out of school. I mean, it's all down from here. I mean, like literally. No, it's really exciting. And I'll continue to kind of watch what you're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks a lot for having me. And yeah, it was great, having a chat.